The suitcase was heavier than it should have been. Not because I owned too much, but because after 12 years of marriage, I had learned how quickly a life could be reduced to 2 suitcases and 1 cardboard box. I stood on my mother's front porch as the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the driveway, and for a few seconds, I kept waiting for Victoria Carter to change her mind. She didn't. She stood inside the doorway with her arms folded, looking at me as if I were a tenant whose lease had expired. "You made your choices, Emily," she said. "Now you have to live with them." I looked at her. "I'm not asking you to fix my life, Mom. I just need somewhere to stay for a few weeks. A few weeks becomes a few months becomes another year. I've seen that happen before." "I'm your daughter." Her expression barely changed. "You're 38. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because 38 was old. It wasn't, but because she said it as if my age erased my right to kindness. I had finalized my divorce from Mark 2 days earlier. 12 years together had ended quietly and painfully, without the kind of obvious villain people could point at afterward. Mark hadn't stolen my money. He hadn't cheated on me. He hadn't thrown me out into the rain. We had simply become two people who could no longer make a marriage work. After the divorce settlement, I had some savings, a small retirement account, and very little cash I could access immediately. I thought my mother's house would give me time to breathe. I was wrong. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Victoria looked toward the driveway. "You'll figure it out." I almost laughed. That was something wealthy people said when they had never had to count the days until rent was due. "You know I don't have a place yet." "Then find one." "Mom, please." Her face hardened. "Emily, I spent years teaching you not to depend on anyone. I'm not going to undo that now." I stared at her. There was something almost cruel about the way she said it. She believed she was teaching me a lesson. Maybe that was the worst part. She didn't think she was hurting me. She thought she was making me stronger. I picked up my suitcase. "Fine." She didn't answer. I walked down the steps, crossed the driveway, and put my bags into the trunk of my old sedan. Before closing it, I looked back. My mother was still standing in the doorway. For 1 second, I thought she might come outside. She didn't. I drove to a motel 20 minutes away because I couldn't afford the apartment I had been considering until I knew what I was going to do next. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. A television hung too high on the wall, and a tiny refrigerator hummed every few minutes. I put my suitcase on the bed and sat beside it. I wasn't crying. I had cried enough during the divorce. What I felt was emptier than sadness. I felt erased. Mark and I had spent 12 years building a life that no longer existed, and my mother had just reminded me that the life I thought I could return to had never really been mine. But what hurt the most wasn't losing my husband. It wasn't losing my home. It was realizing that the woman I had always believed would protect me was the same woman who had just closed the final door in my face. I stood outside with 2 suitcases, almost no cash, nowhere to go, and no idea where I would begin the next morning. If you were in my place, could you forgive a mother for throwing her own daughter out right after a divorce? Comment, forgive or never. I really want to know what you would do. I went back into the motel room and opened the cardboard box I had brought from home. Inside were old photographs, a few letters, my grandmother Eleanor's recipe book, and a small velvet jewelry box. I almost threw the jewelry box away when I saw the initials E.C. written inside the lid. Eleanor Carter. My grandmother. I opened it. Inside were a pair of pearl earrings, a silver ring, and beneath them, wrapped in an old handkerchief, was a black plastic card. It was scratched and faded. There was no Visa logo, no MasterCard logo, just the name of an old bank and a series of numbers. I turned it over. Written in Eleanor's handwriting was a sentence that made me freeze. "If you ever find yourself with nowhere to go, take this to the bank." I stared at those words for a long time. I recognized that handwriting immediately. I also remembered the last time my grandmother had said those words to me. I had been 23. She was sitting beside me in her kitchen, drinking tea while my mother argued with someone on the phone in the next room. Eleanor pushed the card toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "Something you may need one day." "For what?" She smiled. "You'll know." "Grandma, that's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." I had laughed then because that was how Eleanor was. She could turn a sentence into a locked door. She had died 8 years ago. For 8 years, I had forgotten the card existed. Now, sitting alone in a motel room after my mother had closed the door in my face, I suddenly wondered whether my grandmother had known something I didn't. I didn't know what the card was worth. I didn't even know whether the account still existed. But I remembered Eleanor's exact words. If you ever find yourself with nowhere to go. I looked around the motel room. For the first time that day, I knew what I had to do. I was going to the bank. The next morning, I called my best friend Sarah before doing anything else. Sarah and I had known each other since college, and she had a rare ability to make silence feel less awkward. "You're going to the bank with an ancient piece of plastic?" she asked after I explained. "Apparently." "Do you know what's on it?" "No." "Do you know whether the bank still exists?" "Yes." "Do you know whether your grandmother left you anything?" "Also no." There was a pause. "Then I think you should go." I smiled for the first time since leaving my mother's house. That's surprisingly supportive. I'm supportive because this could be $5 or $5 million, and either way, I want the story. "You're terrible." "I know." I put the card into my purse. Before leaving, I opened Eleanor's recipe book. I didn't know why. Maybe I was looking for another clue. Most of the pages contained recipes written in her small, neat handwriting, but near the back, I found an old note tucked between 2 pages. It wasn't addressed to me, it was written to my mother. I read it twice. "Victoria, protecting the family is not the same as controlling it. Eleanor." I sat very still. I didn't know when the note had been written. There was no date. I put it back. I told myself it meant nothing. I was still trying to believe that when I drove across town to Millbrook Private Bank. The building looked exactly like the kind of bank my grandmother would have trusted. Dark stone outside, brass lettering, quiet lobby, no giant television screens, no bright advertisements promising rewards points. I parked my car and sat there for 30 seconds. I almost drove away. The card looked ridiculous in my hand. It was old enough that I wasn't even sure the magnetic strip had survived. Maybe Eleanor had left me a closed account with $20 in it. Maybe the bank would politely smile and tell me the card was worthless. But I thought about my mother's voice. "You're 38. Figure it out." I got out of the car. Inside, there were 3 teller windows. A young woman named Maya smiled when I approached. "Good morning, how can I help you?" I took the card from my purse. "This is going to sound strange." She smiled. "You'd be surprised. My grandmother gave me this years ago. She passed away 8 years ago. I don't know what it's connected to." I thought maybe there was an old account or something. Maya carefully took the card. "Do you have identification?" I handed her my driver's license. She typed my name. Then she entered the number printed on the card. Nothing happened for several seconds. Maya frowned. She tried again. Her fingers stopped. She looked at the screen. Then at the card. Then back at me. I knew that look. I had worked in hospital administration before my marriage. I had spent years watching people realize that a routine problem wasn't routine anymore. "Is something wrong?" Maya didn't answer. She stood up and walked toward a small door behind the teller line. A few moments later, she returned with a man in a navy suit. He looked to be in his early 60s. He introduced himself as Thomas Reed, the branch manager, but he didn't shake my hand immediately. His eyes went straight to the card. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "My grandmother left it to me." "Her name?" "Eleanor Carter." His expression changed. "Please come with me." Maya pushed the card across the counter, but Thomas stopped her. "Leave it here." I looked at him. "Am I in trouble?" "No." "Then why does everyone look like I'm about to be arrested?" He almost smiled. "Because this card hasn't been presented at a teller window in a very long time." He led me into a private office. The door closed behind us. Thomas placed the card on the table. "Before we discuss anything, I need to verify your identity." He asked for my driver's license, date of birth, current address, and several pieces of information about Eleanor. Then he leaned back. "Emily Carter." "Yes." "Your grandmother was Eleanor Carter." "Yes." "And you said she personally gave this card to you?" "Yes." He was quiet. Finally he said, "This isn't a debit card." I looked at him. I figured that much out. It was an old private client identification card. We issued cards like this to certain private banking clients decades ago. Your grandmother was one of them. Okay, but that's not the important part. My stomach tightened. Then what is? Thomas opened an old electronic record. This card is associated with a trust relationship. What kind of trust? He hesitated. The Carter Family Trust. I stared at him. I've never heard of it. Thomas looked directly at me. You're one of the named beneficiaries. I actually laughed because I thought I had misunderstood him. I'm sorry. What? Thomas repeated it. You're listed as a beneficiary of the Carter Family Trust. My grandmother had a trust? Yes. And I'm a beneficiary? Yes. Why don't I know about it? Thomas didn't answer immediately. That silence told me more than his words had. Mr. Reed? There are legal and privacy restrictions on what I can explain here. The bank is not the trustee. Then who is? A corporate trust administrator handles the trust. So what exactly is this card for? It was an identification card connected to your grandmother's private banking relationship. It was never intended to function like a normal debit card. I looked at it again. It suddenly seemed less like a useless piece of plastic and more like a key I had been carrying without knowing what door it opened. Can you tell me what's in the trust? Thomas shook his head. Not all of it. But I can tell you that your grandmother's relationship with the bank was substantial. How substantial? He paused. You'll need your attorney. I don't have one for this. Then I strongly recommend you get one. He turned his monitor slightly away from me. There is another issue. Of course there is. Your mother appears in the original correspondence associated with the trust. I stared at him. My mother? Victoria Carter. Yes, she was listed as a family contact after your grandmother's death. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My mother had never told me about any trust, not once. I thanked Thomas and left the bank with the card in my purse. I sat in my car and called Rachel Morgan, a lawyer a former colleague had recommended. She agreed to meet me that afternoon. When I arrived at her office, I put the card on the table. This is all I have. Rachel examined it. Where did you get this? My grandmother. And you were told to take it to the bank if you ever had nowhere to go? Yes. Rachel looked up. Interesting. That's what everyone keeps saying. She requested the preliminary records from Millbrook. Then she began explaining what she knew. Eleanor had created an irrevocable trust 15 years earlier. The trust contained a mixture of cash reserves, investment assets, real estate interests, and an interest in a family holding structure. I listened, trying to keep up. What does that mean for me? I asked. Rachel folded her hands. It means your grandmother planned for you to have independent financial protection. How much? She hesitated. Based on the preliminary valuation, your beneficial interest is approximately $4.6 million. I thought I had misheard her. How much? Approximately $4.6 million. I stared at the card, then at Rachel, then at the floor. I came to you because I couldn't afford my apartment deposit. Rachel nodded. I know. And you're telling me my grandmother left me $4.6 million? I'm telling you the trust contains assets with an estimated beneficial interest of approximately $4.6 million. That is not the same as $4.6 million sitting in a checking account. Right, I swallowed. Of course. Rachel explained that about $450,000 was held in cash reserves, around $1.65 million in investment assets, roughly $1.8 million in real estate interests, and approximately $700,000 represented the estimated value of the family holding interest. Some portions could be distributed, others required valuation and legal administration. So I can't just walk into the bank and take $4 million. No. Good. She looked amused. Good? If you had said yes, I'd assume this was a scam. Rachel smiled. Then she became serious. There's something else. She opened a document. The trust contains a beneficiary provision tied to your marriage. I leaned forward. What does that mean? Your grandmother didn't want these assets exposed to a marital property claim while you were married. Okay. The provision activates upon legal termination of the marriage. I stared at her. My divorce. Yes. I looked down at my hands. My divorce, which I had thought had taken everything from me, had just triggered the one financial protection I never knew existed. Rachel continued. The trustee will still need to verify the divorce, confirm the beneficiary status, and establish the appropriate distribution structure. But the provision has been triggered. Why didn't anyone tell me? Rachel turned another page. That's what I'm trying to find out. She opened an old correspondence file. The first page was dated 8 years earlier. The sender was Victoria Carter. My mother. Rachel looked at me. Emily, your mother knew about the trust. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The room seemed to become very quiet. My mother had known. She had known for 8 years, and 2 days ago, she had looked me in the eye and told me to figure my life out. Rachel spent the next 2 days gathering documents. I returned to the motel, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Eleanor. Why had she never told me? Why had my mother never told me? Why had Eleanor given me the card personally? The next morning, Rachel called. Come in. Good news or bad news? Complicated news. That's not encouraging. It isn't necessarily bad. When I arrived, a man named David Lawson was waiting in Rachel's conference room. He was 67, silver-haired, and had the patient expression of someone who had spent decades explaining complicated financial structures to people who didn't ask for them. He represented the corporate trustee. He opened the file. Miss Carter, I want to be very clear. Your grandmother's trust is valid. Your beneficiary status is valid. The divorce provision has been triggered. I nodded. Then why didn't I know about it? David looked at Rachel. The trust was established to protect your financial independence, but the administration after your grandmother's death was handled through several family channels. My mother. He didn't answer directly. Your mother was not the trustee. She did not control the trust, but she was a family contact who received certain correspondence. And she never told me. David looked uncomfortable. The records suggest that you were not provided with the full beneficiary information. Why? That is something you should discuss with your attorney. I looked at Rachel. She already had another file open. There is a letter from Victoria dated 3 years after Eleanor's death. She read the relevant portion. Emily will not need access to these assets unless her marriage ends. Until then, the family should maintain stability. I felt my throat tighten. She knew. Rachel nodded. Yes, she knew that if I ever divorced Mark, this would happen. She knew there was a provision. And she still kicked me out. Nobody answered. David finally said, the trust was specifically designed so your housing and retirement would not depend entirely on a spouse or parent. That sentence hit me harder than the $4.6 million. My grandmother had understood something about my life that I hadn't. She had known that financial dependence could become a form of vulnerability. Rachel explained the assets again. The cash reserves and investment portfolio were relatively straightforward. The real estate interests required independent valuation. The family holding interest was more complicated because Victoria controlled the company that managed several of the underlying properties. I looked at the diagram. So part of what Grandma left me is connected to something my mother controls? David nodded. Indirectly. What happens if I claim it? You become a beneficiary with enforceable rights. Depending on the valuation and structure, the holding company may need to purchase the trust's interest or accommodate your ownership. I understood enough, so I could make things difficult for my mother. Rachel corrected me. You could enforce your rights. Whether that makes things difficult for her is a separate question. That afternoon, Rachel introduced me to Michael Grant, a former financial advisor who had worked with Victoria for more than 15 years. We met at a quiet cafe. Michael looked nervous before I even sat down. You know about the trust, I said. He looked at his coffee. I knew there was a trust. Did you know I was the beneficiary? Yes. Did you know my mother knew? He sighed. Yes. Then why didn't anyone tell me? Michael finally looked at me. Because your mother believed the trust was something your grandmother had created to keep family assets outside her control. That's not an answer. No. He rubbed his forehead. Your mother didn't steal anything. She didn't alter the trust. She didn't have the authority to do that. Then what did she do? Michael hesitated. She made sure you never knew enough to ask for it. I stared at him. How? After your grandmother died, your mother handled much of the family correspondence. She told people you were aware of the general estate plan. She kept the trust details separate. And you let her? I thought she would eventually tell you. When? He didn't answer. After my marriage ended? Possibly. I laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. That's exactly what happened. Michael reached into his folder. There is one thing you should see. He gave me a copy of an email. It was from my mother. The date was 8 years ago. The subject line read, Eleanor Carter Estate. The email contained one sentence that changed everything. Emily will not receive anything unless she leaves the marriage. I read it twice. Then a third time. My mother hadn't simply known about the trust. She had understood the condition. She had known that my divorce would eventually activate it. And yet, when I stood on her porch 2 days earlier, she had told me I needed to learn how to live without depending on anyone. I suddenly understood why the card felt different in my hand. Eleanor hadn't simply left me money, she had left me a way out. I wanted to hate Victoria. It would have been easier if she had been cruel for no reason. But people rarely behave badly for only one reason. Rachel warned me not to confront my mother until we understood the legal position. You have leverage now, she said. Don't waste it on an emotional argument. I agreed. Then Victoria called me. I almost didn't answer. Emily. Mom, we need to talk. About Grandma's trust? Silence. So, you know. I know enough. Her voice changed. It wasn't the confident voice she had used on the porch. Where are you? Somewhere safe. Are you staying at a motel? Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because you shouldn't be living like that. I almost laughed. You kicked me out. I was trying to make you stand on your own. You knew I had a trust. Another silence. Yes. For 8 years. I didn't control it. You controlled whether I knew about it. Emily. Why? My mother exhaled. Because your grandmother and I disagreed about what that trust meant. What did it mean to you? She thought you needed protection from other people. And you? I thought you needed protection from yourself. That answer made me angry. You didn't even know what I needed. I knew you were married to a man who wasn't good for you. Mark and I got divorced because we couldn't make the marriage work, not because you needed to rescue me. I know. Then why? My mother's voice softened. Because I spent my entire childhood watching money control people. I said nothing, Victoria continued. My father owned everything, the house, the business, the accounts. My mother had a household allowance. She couldn't make a decision without asking him. When I finally built something of my own, I promised myself that no one would ever control me financially again. So you controlled me instead. She was quiet. I thought I was protecting the family. You protected the money. Is there a difference? There is a huge difference. My mother didn't answer. I told her I would only discuss the trust through my attorney. She agreed. 3 days later, Rachel and Rachel arranged a formal meeting with David Lawson, Victoria, and Victoria's attorney. Before that meeting, Rachel explained my options. You can force valuation and distribution. You can challenge the family holding structure. You can request immediate liquidation where permitted. Or you can negotiate a structured buyout. What would you do? I asked. Rachel smiled. I'm your lawyer. I'm not supposed to tell you what I'd do with my own money. Fine. What would you advise? Take what your grandmother intended for your security. Don't take what you don't need simply because you can. I thought about that. For most of my marriage, I had never had enough financial leverage to make decisions freely. Now I had so much leverage that I could damage people if I wanted. I understood, for the first time, why power could become addictive. I could make my mother nervous. I could force her to sell assets. I could make her explain herself to people she had spent decades impressing. But if I used Eleanor's trust to punish Victoria, then Victoria would still control my choices. I didn't want that. I wanted freedom. I wanted a home no one could take away. I wanted enough money to never again stay somewhere because I was afraid of what would happen if I left. I wanted the life Eleanor had tried to protect. I told Rachel, I don't want to destroy my mother's company. Rachel nodded. Good. I want my liquid assets. I want the investments. I want a fair value for the real estate interest. And I want my rights documented so nobody can hide them again. That's exactly what we'll ask for. The next morning, I received a message from David. The meeting was confirmed. For the first time since the divorce, I wasn't afraid of what my mother could take away from me. The meeting took place in a downtown law office with gray walls, expensive furniture, and coffee that tasted like someone had described coffee to a machine and let the machine make it. Rachel sat beside me. Victoria sat across the table. She looked composed. Perfect hair, navy suit, gold watch. The same woman who had stood in the doorway of her house and told me to figure it out. But she looked different now. Maybe because, for the first time, I wasn't sitting across from her as her daughter asking for help. I was sitting there as a beneficiary with legal counsel. David Lawson opened the meeting. The trustee has reviewed the documentation. Emily Carter's beneficiary status is valid. The divorce provision has been triggered. Victoria's attorney asked several questions about valuation. David answered them. Then Rachel said, "We would like the liquid and investment portions distributed according to the trust terms, subject to the standard administration process. We also want an independent appraisal of the real estate interests." Victoria's attorney leaned back. "That is reasonable," Rachel continued. "Regarding the family holding interest, we propose a structured buyout based on independent valuation." Victoria finally spoke. "That would put pressure on the company." I looked at her. "I'm not trying to put pressure on the company. You have the ability to." "Yes." "Then why not use it?" I answered honestly. "Because Grandma didn't leave me a weapon." My mother looked down. "She left me protection." Nobody spoke for several seconds. David nodded. "That is consistent with the trust's stated purpose." Victoria's face tightened. "You don't understand what your grandmother was trying to do." I looked at her. "Then tell me." She hesitated. "She believed you should never be financially dependent on a husband." "I agree. She also believed you should never be financially dependent on me." "I agree with that, too." Victoria's eyes filled slightly, but she didn't cry. My mother rarely cried. She treated emotion like a leak that needed to be repaired. "I thought if I kept the trust quiet, you would stay focused on your marriage and your life. You knew Mark and I were unhappy." "Yes, and you still didn't tell me. I thought you would make decisions based on the money." "Maybe I would have." "Exactly." I shook my head. "Mom, you were afraid that knowing I had a safety net would make me leave." She didn't deny it. "I thought it might." That was the truth I hadn't expected. My mother hadn't hidden the trust because she wanted to steal it. She had hidden it because she believed information was dangerous. She thought if I knew I could leave, I might leave. She had confused protection with control. Rachel placed the valuation proposal on the table. "We are not here to punish anyone. We are here to formalize Emily's rights." Victoria's attorney nodded. The trustee agreed. Over the next 3 hours, the numbers were negotiated. The cash reserve and investment portions would be transferred according to the trust's distribution schedule. The real estate interests would be independently valued. The family holding interest would be purchased through a structured arrangement over several years. Emily would receive fair value. Victoria's company would retain stability. There would be no forced liquidation of the family business. And most importantly, all future trust communications would go directly to Emily and her attorney. No family intermediary. No informal contact. No one could decide what she was allowed to know about her own assets. At one point, Victoria asked for a private conversation. Rachel looked at me. I nodded. Everyone else left the room. My mother sat across from me. "I am sorry," she said. It was the first time I had ever heard her say those words without adding an explanation immediately afterward. I waited. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know. I didn't think I was hurting you." "I know. That doesn't make it better." "No." She looked down. "Your grandmother was right about one thing." "What?" "You deserve to have your own protection." I didn't know what to say. My mother had spent years teaching me to be strong. Somehow, she had never learned that strength wasn't the same thing as control. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today," she said. "Good." She gave a small, sad smile. "You always were stubborn." I got that from Grandma. For the first time, my mother laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it was human. The settlement took months. There were valuations, tax questions, investment transfers, legal documents, and more signatures than I ever wanted to see again. I did not receive a giant $4.6 million check. I was glad I didn't. The money was distributed according to the trust terms. The investment portfolio remained invested. Cash reserves were transferred. The real estate interest was independently valued. The family holding interest was converted into a structured buyout. When everything was finally settled, I had something I had never had before: financial independence that did not depend on my husband, my mother, or anyone else. I bought a modest condo, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small office, a balcony with a view of old maple trees. It wasn't the kind of place people post online to prove they've made it. It was simply mine. That mattered more. Sarah came over the day I moved in. She walked through the living room and looked at me. "You realize you're a millionaire now?" "Apparently. And you're still worried about whether the dishwasher is energy efficient." "Electricity costs money." She laughed. "You're impossible." I smiled. 6 months earlier, I had been sitting in a motel wondering whether I could afford a security deposit. Now I was choosing furniture because I liked it rather than because it was the cheapest option. But the money wasn't the part that changed me most. I went back to work. I didn't need a huge salary. I wanted a reason to get up in the morning. I took an administrative position with a nonprofit healthcare organization. The first week was humbling. Technology had changed since I left the workforce. I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out why a spreadsheet wouldn't save before realizing I had been clicking the wrong button. Sarah told me, "You're managing millions and losing fights with Excel, apparently." That's balance. Mark called once after hearing that I had found a new place. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked around my kitchen. "Yeah. Really, really." He paused. "I'm glad." There was no jealousy in his voice, no attempt to ask about the money, just relief. "I hope things work out for you," he said. "For you too, Mark." We ended the call. It was surprisingly peaceful. I realized then that the divorce hadn't been the greatest betrayal in my story. The greatest betrayal had been discovering that the person I thought would protect me had known I was protected all along and had chosen not to tell me. But I also realized something else. Mark and I had failed at marriage. That didn't make either of us the enemy. My mother had made a terrible decision. That didn't erase every good thing she had ever done for me. People could be wrong without becoming monsters. That distinction made forgiveness possible, even if trust had to be rebuilt slowly. A few months later, Victoria called. "Would you like to come for Thanksgiving?" I almost said no. Then I thought about how much had changed. "I'll come for dessert," I said. She laughed softly. "That's fair." When I arrived, the house looked exactly the same. Same staircase, same dining room, same brass light fixture. But I felt different walking through it. I wasn't returning as a daughter asking permission to stay. I was visiting. That distinction was enormous. After dinner, Victoria found me in the kitchen. "Your grandmother used to stand right there," she said. I looked at the counter. "I remember. She told me once that you would be okay." I smiled. She was right. Victoria looked at me. She usually was. A year after my divorce, I went back to Millbrook Private Bank for a routine meeting with the trustee. Thomas Reed recognized me immediately. "Miss Carter." "Please call me Emily." He smiled. "Emily." After the meeting, I took the old black card out of my wallet. It had been sitting there for months. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What should I do with this?" Thomas turned the card over. "It's inactive now." "So it's useless?" "Technically, yes." "That's disappointing," he laughed. "Were you hoping it still opened some secret account?" "Maybe." "No secret account." "Can I keep it?" "Of course." I put it back in my wallet. I didn't throw it away. A few days later, I framed it on my desk. Sarah saw it and stared at me. "You framed an expired bank card?" "It's not really a bank card." "Then what is it?" I looked at Eleanor's handwriting on the back. "If you ever find yourself with nowhere to go, take this to the bank." "Proof," I said. "Proof of what?" I thought about my grandmother, about my mother, about the motel room, about the suitcase on the porch, about the $4.6 million I never knew existed. Proof that someone believed I deserved a choice. Sarah was quiet. Then she nodded. "That's actually beautiful." I looked at the card again. For months, everyone had talked about the trust as if the money were the entire story. It wasn't. The money gave me a home. It protected my retirement. It allowed me to stop measuring every decision by whether I could afford to leave. But the money didn't repair my marriage. It didn't give me back the years I spent outside the workforce. It didn't erase the pain of my mother's decision. It didn't magically make me fearless. What Eleanor left me was something more important than a number. She left me the ability to choose. My mother had once said, "You made your choices, now live with them." At the time, I thought she was condemning me. Years later, I understood something different. Every adult deserves the right to make choices without being controlled by fear. Money matters, financial security matters, but money should be a tool, not a leash. For years, I had believed that because I wasn't earning a traditional salary during my marriage, my contributions somehow counted less. I had managed a home. I had supported a marriage. I had rebuilt my life after divorce. None of those things appeared on a paycheck. That didn't make them worthless. My grandmother understood that. She didn't leave me a weapon against my mother. She didn't leave me a reason to destroy my family. She left me a door. I just had to be brave enough to walk through it. And if there is one lesson I want everyone listening to this story to remember, it is this. Never confuse financial dependence with personal worth. If someone controls the money in your life, that does not mean they control your value. Build your own skills. Understand your finances. Read the documents that affect your future. Ask questions, even when the answers make powerful people uncomfortable. And most importantly, don't wait for a crisis to discover whether you have a choice. The strongest kind of freedom isn't having enough money to make everyone else afraid of you. It's having enough independence that nobody can make you afraid to leave. My mother thought kicking me out would leave me with nothing. She was right about one thing. I left that house with almost nothing. What she didn't know was that my grandmother had already made sure I would never have to beg anyone for a place to belong again. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the knowledge that your life belongs to you.